And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much.
It looked like the royal garden party would be another calm afternoon of smiles and polite conversation. Then Princess Anne noticed something that changed everything. It wasn't a speech, an unexpected guest, or a breach of protocol. It was Queen Camilla, wearing Princess Diana's famous emerald choker. In that instant, Anne made a decision that transformed an ordinary royal event into a moment of intense tension. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest royal stories. Anne didn't react immediately. She simply stood still, staring at the necklace as the atmosphere around her grew noticeably heavier. A royal garden party is meant to represent unity, where members of the royal family meet invited guests in a relaxed setting. It is not a place for controversy or painful reminders of the past. But that emerald choker carried far more than beauty. It had become closely linked with Princess Diana, representing not only elegance but also the emotional history surrounding her life within the monarchy. Camilla greeted guests with a calm smile, acting as though nothing was unusual. She continued exchanging handshakes and friendly conversations, hoping the afternoon would unfold as planned. Anne, however, saw something very different. She wasn't looking at an expensive piece of jewelry. She saw a deeply personal symbol connected to Diana's memory being displayed before the public. To her, remaining silent would only suggest that crossing such a line was acceptable. One senior palace aide noticed Anne's expression before anyone else. Trained to recognize even the smallest change in royal body language, the aide later recalled that her face shifted from surprise to complete determination. According to palace accounts, Anne immediately recognized the necklace, realized it had not been approved for the occasion, and quietly instructed officials to pause the event before the situation became even more serious. Camilla tried to continue as though nothing had happened. She maintained her composure, smiled politely, and greeted guests. But the atmosphere had already changed. Conversations slowed, guests exchanged uneasy glances, and many found themselves looking from Camilla's face to the emerald choker. No one mentioned Diana aloud, yet her presence seemed to fill the entire garden. Anne stepped forward without raising her voice. She didn't create a public scene, yet her calm approach carried unmistakable authority. Everyone nearby understood that this wasn't about style or royal fashion. It was about Diana's legacy appearing in public without warning or agreement. When Camilla saw Anne approaching, she realized the situation had already gone too far. The reception had paused, the guests had noticed, and palace staff stood frozen, unsure how events would unfold next. To understand why one necklace could interrupt an entire royal gathering, it's important to understand the people involved. Princess Anne wasn't offended by the jewelry itself. She believed a boundary had been crossed, one the family had quietly respected for years. Camilla, meanwhile, stood under the weight of countless watchful eyes. She tried to remain confident, but the emeralds around her neck had become impossible to ignore. Between the two women stood more than Diana's memory. There were years of silence, complicated history, and emotions the royal family had never completely left behind. Anne had always been known for speaking plainly when something felt wrong. She rarely ignored difficult situations simply to preserve appearances. Camilla understood that better than most. She also knew Diana's jewelry had never been ordinary royal accessories. They carried public affection, private memories, and emotions no official palace statement could erase. Although royal heirlooms are normally symbols of tradition, this emerald choker represented something much more personal. For many people, it carried the memory of loss. Camilla remained composed with her head held high. She may have hoped the necklace represented continuity within the monarchy, showing that the institution could move forward while honoring its history. Anne saw something entirely different. To her, the emeralds looked less like a symbol of unity and more like a reminder of Diana's private struggles placed on public display. Across the garden, Prince William noticed Anne's expression. He immediately sensed that this was far more serious than a minor disagreement. Without drawing attention, he quietly moved closer. William had spent years protecting his mother's memory. One glance at the emerald choker told him everything he needed to know. Nearby, Catherine also understood the significance of the moment. She lowered her eyes without saying a word. According to a later private account shared with palace staff, she described the atmosphere as emotionally overwhelming. Diana's name never had to be spoken because everyone present could feel the weight of her memory. Catherine understood that Camilla now faced an impossible situation. Removing the necklace would appear like an admission of wrongdoing. Keeping it on could easily be seen as an act of defiance. Standing between those two choices, Camilla realized there was no easy way out. Princess Anne stood in complete silence, yet that silence carried more authority than any raised voice ever could. Then King Charles was informed. His first reaction was not anger, it was concern. Charles knew his sister well enough to understand that Anne never acted on emotion alone. She was careful, disciplined, and rarely made public interventions without a serious reason. If she had chosen to halt a royal garden party in full view of guests, then something important had happened long before Camilla stepped onto the lawn. That realization unsettled him, because it meant the real story had not begun at the garden party. It had started days earlier. The confrontation everyone witnessed on the lawn had actually begun 3 nights before, inside a private jewelry review at Clarence's house, when a velvet case was quietly opened and Princess Diana's emerald choker was placed before Queen Camilla. What happened inside that room would later be remembered as the true turning point. One warning was given, one warning was ignored. As Camilla looked down at the emerald necklace, she appeared calm and confident. At first, she did not see controversy. She saw history, royal tradition, and an opportunity to show that the monarchy could move forward without appearing trapped by its past. Clarence's house, one of King Charles's official royal residences, had long served as the setting for sensitive family discussions away from public attention. That evening, the jewelry review had been arranged to determine which royal heirloom pieces would be approved for upcoming engagements. Normally, a jewelry review is simply a private inspection of historic pieces before they are worn in public. This meeting, however, carried far greater significance. Princess Anne arrived slightly later than the others and immediately noticed the emerald choker resting inside the velvet case. She did not need anyone to explain its importance. To Anne, Diana's emerald choker was never just another royal heirloom. It represented memory, it represented grief, and it represented emotions that still lived deep within both the royal family and the public. As Anne examined the display, she noticed an accompanying note identifying the necklace as restricted for highly sensitive occasions. That designation was not meaningless. It indicated that the piece required special approval because wearing it publicly could reopen painful memories, invite controversy, or create serious misunderstandings. The upcoming garden party was exactly the kind of public event where such risks mattered most. Camilla questioned the restriction. She asked why the monarchy should continue hiding from its own history when its future depended upon showing continuity and stability. From her perspective, wearing the emerald choker could demonstrate confidence. It could send a message that the crown was strong enough to acknowledge every chapter of its history without fear. Anne viewed the situation very differently. In a calm but unmistakably firm voice, she replied that continuity without respect would not appear as healing. It would appear as conquest. The room fell quiet. Camilla listened carefully, yet she did not retreat from her position. According to a documented palace account later prepared for senior aides after the garden party was halted, Anne made her position unmistakably clear. She directly warned Camilla that Diana's emerald choker should not be worn at the upcoming event. She explained that Diana's memory was not a symbol to be displayed simply for the appearance of unity. Anne never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her certainty gave every word far greater weight. Even after receiving that warning, Camilla formally requested permission to wear the necklace. Following Anne's objection, palace staff reviewed the request and marked it as not advised. Within palace procedure, that designation meant officials believed the choice carried significant reputational and emotional risk. Yet despite the warning, despite the written restriction, and despite Anne's direct advice, 3 nights later, Queen Camilla stepped into the royal garden wearing Diana's emerald choker around her neck. The moment Anne saw it, everything became clear. She did not believe there had been any misunderstanding. She did not believe someone had made an accidental mistake. To Anne, the warning had been heard, carefully considered, and ultimately ignored. That realization changed the meaning of the entire afternoon. Camilla was no longer simply wearing a historic necklace. She was wearing the very decision Anne had explicitly asked her not to make. So when Anne finally walked toward Camilla during the garden party, she was not reacting to a sudden surprise. She was responding to a warning that had already been dismissed days earlier. As Princess Anne approached, an unusual silence settled across the royal garden. There were no microphones, no public announcements, yet everyone standing nearby sensed that something serious was unfolding. Anne's posture remained perfectly straight. Camilla instinctively lifted her chin. Then, in the middle of an event carefully designed to project calm, stability, and royal unity, two senior women of the royal family stood facing one another over a necklace forever connected to Princess Diana's memory. Anne stopped only a few steps away, close enough that Camilla could hear every word clearly, far enough that their conversation remained private. She wasted no time with formal pleasantries. In a steady voice, Anne reminded Camilla that the necklace should never have been worn to the garden party, not after the warning given at Clarence House. She continued by explaining that the crown, representing not only the monarchy but also the public responsibilities carried by it, could never be used to justify a personal decision capable of causing such deep emotional consequences. Anne made one final point absolutely clear. Diana's emerald choker had already been classified as emotionally restricted. That designation existed because the necklace carried powerful public meaning and required special approval before appearing at any official royal engagement. Camilla listened carefully, hiding her emotions behind a calm expression. She didn't step away. She didn't reach for the necklace clasp. Instead, she quietly told Anne that she had every right to represent the monarchy without constantly being made to feel like an outsider in her own role. Her voice remained steady, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. Camilla believed the royal family had accepted her in public while continuing to judge her behind closed doors. Anne heard every word, but she did not soften. To her, this was never about Camilla's position within the monarchy. It was about Princess Diana's memory being placed before invited guests, as though the past no longer carried any emotional weight. Prince William stood close enough to step in if necessary. He understood that one poorly chosen sentence could transform a private disagreement into a public crisis. Watching Anne's expression, William immediately realized she was completely serious. Nearby, Catherine remained motionless. The Princess of Wales looked visibly shaken, not only by the emerald choker itself, but by the silence that surrounded Diana's memory. She never spoke. She didn't have to. The way she lowered her eyes told William everything. The moment had already become deeply painful. Anne then repeated information that would later appear in an official palace briefing. She reminded Camilla that the emerald choker had been flagged well before the garden party. The restriction, she explained, had never been vague or open to interpretation. It clearly stated that the necklace was not advised for the event because Diana's emotional connection to it would inevitably overshadow the entire occasion. For the first time, Camilla looked away. She knew the warning existed. Anne knew she knew. Before either woman could continue, King Charles arrived. His eyes moved first to Anne, then to Camilla. Finally, they settled on the emerald choker resting around her neck. Without anyone explaining a single detail, he understood the shape of the problem almost immediately. Anne then made another request. She insisted that the emerald choker be removed from the official party record, the formal palace documentation listing the jewelry approved and worn during the engagement. Charles didn't answer right away. He turned toward his wife. Camilla waited for him to defend her, but that moment never came. As the silence stretched on, the expression on Camilla's face slowly changed. She had expected protection. Instead, she found hesitation. Anne noticed it. William noticed it. Catherine sensed it before anyone spoke another word. In that quiet pause, the confrontation became much larger than a disagreement over jewelry. It became a test of where King Charles would stand when Diana's legacy and Camilla's dignity collided, because the true power of the moment wasn't found in Anne's accusation. It was found in Charles's silence. King Charles had spent decades navigating impossible situations inside the royal family, but this moment demanded a decision unlike any he wanted to face. His sister had halted an official royal event. His wife stood publicly embarrassed before family members and invited guests. Diana's memory filled the space between them without anyone speaking her name. Caught between duty and loyalty, Charles realized that remaining silent could sometimes hurt more than giving an order. As palace officials quietly explained the situation, Charles learned that Anne had stopped the garden party because Camilla wore Diana's emerald choker without receiving clear approval. He immediately understood that the issue could not simply be ignored. According to palace protocol, the established system of rules guiding royal events and official decisions, the king possessed the authority to overrule Anne's action. He could have instructed everyone to continue the gathering. He could have publicly defended his wife. But doing so would also have meant dismissing Anne's judgment in front of the royal family, palace staff, and invited guests. Camilla looked toward him with quiet hope. She had endured criticism before. She had lived through years of public scrutiny. But this felt different. This time, the embarrassment had unfolded openly before witnesses. More than anything, she needed Charles to show that her position beside him remained secure. She wanted the king to stand beside her without hesitation. Instead, Charles's attention shifted from Camilla to Anne. Without speaking, the atmosphere changed once again. Anne stood firmly. She no longer looked upset. She looked completely certain. She had warned Camilla before the garden party. She believed that warning had been ignored. Charles could see it clearly. Anne wasn't reacting emotionally. She was defending what she believed had already been decided. For Anne, Diana's memory still carried enormous emotional importance, not only inside the royal family but throughout the country. One careless symbol, displayed at the wrong moment, could reopen years of public grief. She wasn't asking Charles to punish Camilla. She simply wanted the family to acknowledge that an important line had been crossed. William then spoke quietly. His voice remained calm, yet his words carried significant weight. He urged his father not to publicly defend the emerald choker. Doing so, he explained, could make the monarchy appear insensitive toward Diana's legacy. William never criticized Camilla personally. He never raised his voice. Instead, the future king made one point perfectly clear. Protecting the institution also meant protecting the memory of the woman millions of people still deeply respected. Charles heard him. Camilla heard him too. Moments later, a senior palace aide confirmed the detail that made reversing course nearly impossible. According to an official briefing prepared after the confrontation, the jewelry file specifically advised against wearing Diana's emerald choker during emotionally sensitive public engagements. That written note changed everything. It proved this had never been a sudden emotional reaction. The concern had existed long before the garden party began. The risks had already been identified before Camilla ever placed the necklace around her neck. In the end, Charles made his decision without delivering a speech. He did not overturn Anne's instruction. He did not order the garden party to continue immediately. Instead, he allowed Anne's decision to remain in place. That silence became the loudest decision anyone heard that day. Camilla understood its meaning immediately. Anne understood it as well. William quietly looked away, knowing the damage had already been done. Camilla remained standing in the silence Charles had left behind. She had not been publicly condemned, but she had not been publicly defended either, and that became the first real consequence of the confrontation. Before the last guests had even left the grounds, and before palace officials could prepare their carefully chosen statements, the royal garden party had stopped being just another event. The moment King Charles chose not to reverse Princess Anne's decision, the afternoon changed completely. It was no longer simply a gathering. It became a verdict unfolding in real time. Queen Camilla never allowed herself to break in front of the guests. She kept her shoulders straight, accepted the quiet whispers surrounding her, and walked away with the composed dignity of someone determined not to let the world witness her pain. But once the palace doors closed behind her, that strength slowly began to crack. The emerald choker was carefully removed, the clasp was unfastened, and in the silence that followed, Camilla realized the family had done far more than question her decision. They had judged what that decision represented. After palace aides escorted her inside, Camilla sat alone. Even though the emerald necklace had already been lifted from her neck, she could still feel its weight. Outside, the garden party resumed under carefully managed circumstances. Palace staff redirected conversations with polite explanations, gentle apologies, and practiced smiles because they understood that the public could never be allowed to see uncertainty inside the monarchy. An official event record is the formal palace document that records what happened during an engagement, who attended, and which royal details received official approval. That record mattered enormously, because it would shape how history remembered the day. Camilla silently watched as palace staff returned the emerald choker to its velvet case. She made no attempt to reach for it. She simply stared as the lid slowly closed. The quiet sound echoed through the room with more force than any argument. Only hours earlier, the necklace had been presented as a symbol of continuity and confidence. Now it was being handled almost like evidence. Camilla finally asked the question that had been building inside her. Why had Anne chosen public humiliation instead of correcting the situation privately? Why hadn't she simply waited? Even as the words left her mouth, Camilla already understood the answer. Anne had waited once before. Her warning had already been ignored. A few moments later, King Charles entered the room. He walked in quietly, carrying the same silence that had followed him throughout the confrontation. He wanted to comfort his wife. He genuinely did, but every sentence seemed impossible to begin. Camilla looked at him with eyes filled not with anger, but with deep disappointment. She needed him to tell her Anne had gone too far. She needed him to say that stopping the garden party had been unnecessary. She needed him to defend her, but Charles understood something painful. His silence outside had already spoken louder than any words he could offer now. By allowing Anne's decision to stand, he had already chosen his position. Anything he said afterward felt painfully late. Then came the detail that wounded Camilla more than anything else. A palace secretary arrived with an internal written notice confirming that the official event record would not include photographs showing her wearing Diana's emerald choker. The meaning was unmistakable. The palace wasn't simply trying to calm public attention. It was quietly removing the image before it could become part of the permanent royal record. Her decision would survive only through rumors, private conversations, and whispered recollections, not through official history. Meanwhile, Princess Anne had already requested an internal review. She wanted palace officials to determine exactly how Diana's emerald choker had been released from storage, despite the written warning attached to it. An internal review is a confidential palace investigation designed to determine who approved a decision, whether procedures were followed correctly, and whether established rules had been broken. That request changed everything. The confrontation was no longer simply emotional. It had become official. Camilla was no longer facing only Anne's personal objection. She was now facing a formal palace process. Charles remained standing beside his wife. Yet the distance between them felt greater than the size of the room itself. He had protected the institution, but in doing so, he had left Camilla standing alone. She understood that reality more clearly than anyone. She had not been publicly scolded. She had not been openly condemned. Instead, she had been quietly overruled. And somehow, that silence hurt even more. Outside those private rooms, the consequences continued to spread throughout the royal family. Prince William and Catherine both understood that the palace could not simply dismiss the incident as a private misunderstanding. For William, the events had reopened emotions connected to his mother's memory. For Catherine, they had reopened an old wound that had never completely healed. Sooner or later, the family would have to face the issue honestly, without palace aides, without carefully written statements, without polished explanations. And while Camilla sat quietly carrying the emotional weight of everything that had happened, William and Catherine found themselves confronting a question the monarchy could no longer avoid. Away from palace staff, formal protocol, and whispered advice, they finally spoke alone. No officials interrupted them. No announcements had yet been prepared. No public statement had been approved. For the first time that day, the future king and queen were left with nothing except the truth. William understood exactly what the emerald choker had brought back into the open. Catherine understood something even more profound. Diana's memory could never be protected by silence alone. William stood quietly, carrying an anger he had no desire to display. He had watched Camilla wear the necklace. He had watched Anne stop the garden party. He had watched his father struggle between loyalty to his wife and responsibility to the crown. Now William faced a difficult question of his own. What would his own silence mean? Jewelry closely connected to Princess Diana was never treated as ordinary royal property inside the family. Those pieces carried memory. They carried grief. They carried affection. And they carried the emotions of millions of people who continued to see Diana as far more than simply a former member of the royal family. Catherine listened carefully, knowing that whatever happened next would shape not only the family's future, but also the way Diana's legacy would continue to be remembered. Catherine remained silent for a moment before answering. She understood William's pain completely, but she also understood the danger of allowing that pain to become punishment. Camilla had been publicly embarrassed, and no matter how justified Anne's concerns may have been, that humiliation could not simply be erased. The queen consort had made a decision that reopened old wounds, but Catherine believed the family could never heal one wound by creating another. That was why the moment carried such enormous significance. It was no longer simply about an emerald necklace. It had become a question of whether the monarchy could protect memory without losing its compassion. William finally admitted what had weighed on him since the garden party had been stopped. He confessed that watching Camilla wear Diana's emerald choker made him feel as though his mother's memory had become something to be shared, claimed, and reshaped for the sake of public appearances. He never raised his voice. He never argued with Catherine. Even when she urged patience and restraint, He listened, but every word he spoke carried the quiet pain of a son who had watched the past suddenly return and demand an answer. Catherine responded with calm rather than emotion. She agreed that Anne's request for tighter safeguards should receive full support. At the same time, she warned that any response must never appear motivated by revenge. A palace response, the official way the royal household explains or manages a sensitive situation, would determine how the country understood everything that had happened. If the palace reacted too harshly, Camilla would become the victim in the public eye. If it reacted too gently, many would believe Diana's memory had been left unprotected. William made his decision. He would support Anne's request for an internal review. He would also support stricter rules governing jewelry closely connected to Princess Diana. According to a private conversation later summarized for senior palace staff, William explained that clear boundaries were now necessary. Catherine agreed with him, but she added one important condition. Whatever action the palace took, it must be presented as an act of dignity, not punishment. Diana's memory deserved protection, Camilla deserved humanity, and the monarchy deserved honesty. That quiet conversation changed everything. William was no longer responding only as Diana's grieving son. He was beginning to think like the future king. Catherine was no longer simply offering comfort. She was helping define the delicate balance between justice and compassion. Together, they transformed the pain of the halted garden party into a boundary the palace could defend with integrity. By the following morning, what had begun as a private royal confrontation had spread far beyond palace walls. Britain did not wake to an ordinary royal headline. Instead, newspapers and broadcasters focused on one unforgettable image: Queen Camilla leaving the garden party with the emerald choker no longer around her neck. Standing in the background was Princess Anne, her expression calm, firm, and almost impossible to read. That single photograph traveled faster than any official palace statement. By breakfast, the necklace had become more than jewelry. It had become a national symbol. Across the country, people debated memory, respect, loyalty, and the meaning of the monarchy itself. Camilla suddenly found herself at the center of a controversy she could no longer control. The palace released a carefully worded statement, describing the interruption as a private matter involving royal protocol, the internal rules that guide official engagements and family responsibilities. But those carefully chosen words felt too polished for an event driven by such powerful emotions. People wanted answers. Why had Camilla worn Diana's emerald choker despite earlier concerns? Why had Princess Anne chosen to stop the garden party? And perhaps most importantly, why had King Charles remained silent instead of publicly defending his wife? Many praised Princess Anne for becoming the only member of the royal family willing to defend a boundary others seemed unwilling to acknowledge. Supporters argued that Anne had done what palace officials should have done before the event had even begun. To them, Diana's emerald choker represented far more than an expensive royal heirloom. It represented the memory of a woman still deeply loved by millions. By intervening, Anne had prevented that memory from being used carelessly. Looking back, her silence during the confrontation appeared stronger than any speech. Camilla's supporters viewed the situation very differently. They believed the queen consort had been publicly humiliated when a quiet private conversation would have been more compassionate. Many argued that after years spent serving beside King Charles, Camilla had once again been reminded that certain wounds inside the royal family might never truly heal. Their frustration extended beyond the necklace itself. They focused on the image of Camilla standing alone while the entire country watched, and no one stepped forward to protect her. Television broadcasters quickly framed the incident as a conflict between royal duty and Princess Diana's enduring legacy. One morning presenter described it as the most emotionally charged royal symbol seen in years. Another remarked that the monarchy had been forced to choose between the woman King Charles married and the woman Britain had never stopped remembering. That interpretation changed everything. The garden party was no longer viewed as a private disagreement. It had become a national conversation. Then one London newspaper ensured the story could not be ignored. Its front page carried a striking headline: "The choker that stopped the crown." Beside those words appeared a tightly cropped photograph of Camilla leaving the event with her neckline now bare. The missing emerald necklace told the entire story without saying a single word. She had arrived wearing it. She had left without it. That image became the defining symbol of the controversy. By midday, a small crowd had gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Among them stood one woman holding a bouquet of emerald-colored flowers. Speaking to reporters during a recorded street interview, she quietly said, "Some things still belong to Diana." Those simple words spread rapidly across television broadcasts, newspapers, and social media. They expressed what many people had struggled to put into words. Princess Anne had stopped the garden party. Queen Camilla had carried the public embarrassment. And once again, Princess Diana's memory had become the center of a conversation the royal family could never fully escape. When the public attention finally began to fade, one truth remained impossible to ignore. King Charles had chosen silence. Prince William and Catherine had quietly helped shape the family's response. The palace could manage the official record. It could soften the wording. It could remove photographs. It could describe everything as a matter of protocol. But it could never control the emotional truth people had already accepted. For many, this was never simply about an emerald choker. It had become a question of respect. In the end, the palace could influence the official story, but it could not erase what the moment had revealed. As the days passed, the halted garden party came to represent something much greater than anger, jewelry, or a single afternoon of royal discomfort. Princess Anne had done more than interrupt an event. She had forced the monarchy to acknowledge that some memories cannot be borrowed for convenience. Queen Camilla had done more than wear an historic necklace. She had touched a memory powerful enough to stop the crown in its tracks. Anne's decision did not end when the last guest departed. Its impact continued behind palace walls. It entered official records. It shaped private discussions. And it influenced conversations the public was never meant to hear. In the weeks that followed, palace officials concluded that jewelry closely associated with Princess Diana would require far stricter approval before appearing at future public engagements. These Diana-linked jewels were no longer viewed as ordinary royal heirlooms. They were recognized as symbols deeply connected to her life, her legacy, and the emotional bond millions of people still felt with her. That change mattered, because the monarchy had finally acknowledged that some royal symbols carry far more than beauty. They carry grief. They carry loyalty. They carry history, and history cannot be handled carelessly. For Camilla, the emotional impact remained long after the garden party ended. She had entered the event believing the emerald choker could symbolize continuity, confidence, and the strength of the modern monarchy. She left understanding that the necklace had become evidence of a boundary she could no longer ignore. Camilla realized that Anne's intervention had not judged the jewelry itself. It had judged the meaning behind wearing it. That realization stayed with her. She had not been rejected by the royal family. But she had been reminded that acceptance did not automatically grant ownership over every part of the monarchy's past. King Charles carried his own burden. By allowing Anne's decision to stand, he believed he had protected the institution from a much greater public crisis. Yet in doing so, he had failed to fully protect the woman standing beside him. He understood that his silence had preserved the crown. He also understood that the same silence had left Camilla standing alone. That became the price of his decision. Duty had prevailed, but love had paid the cost. William and Catherine ensured that Anne's decision would have lasting influence. According to a private conversation later summarized for senior palace staff, William supported stronger protections surrounding Diana's jewelry and the way it could be used in official appearances. Catherine agreed, but she insisted that every future decision must reflect dignity rather than revenge. Together, their support transformed Anne's personal intervention into an enduring family standard. Anne had drawn the boundary. William and Catherine helped ensure it remained in place. The official palace record ultimately described the interruption as a matter of protocol, a formal term referring to the rules that guide royal conduct and official events. But everyone inside the palace understood that the deeper issue reached far beyond protocol. The true force behind the decision had been Diana's memory. Not anger, not gossip, not royal pride, memory. Anne's decision marked the moment the monarchy chose reverence over convenience. Camilla learned that certain symbols could never be worn without consequence. Charles learned that silence can sometimes protect a crown while quietly breaking a heart. And the royal family learned that Princess Diana's legacy was never something that could simply be closed, like the final page of a chapter whenever it became uncomfortable. The garden party ended in silence, but its message echoed far beyond the palace gates. Princess Diana's legacy had spoken once again, and even the crown had been forced to listen. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal story. We'll see you in the next video.